Meet Ariana. It's 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. She's sitting on her living room sofa, balancing her laptop on her knees. Her husband walks in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You need to call it a night, honey," he says gently. She nods absentmindedly, staring at the screen. The reality is, she can't. There's just too much to do. Ariana is the vice president of training for a leading pharmaceutical company, a role she worked hard to earn. Her days are consumed with developing programs, supporting her team, and dealing with the constant changes in regulation and compliance that come with the industry. She's brilliant and respected, but lately, she feels like she's running on fumes. At work, her team looks to her for answers, and her leaders expect her to stay ahead of the curve. At home, her husband is supportive, but lately she's felt guilty because she's been so distracted. Their nightly conversations often start with him asking, "How was your day?" and end with her rattling off a list of tasks that she didn't get to. What frustrates Ariana most is the lack of clarity she feels. She's always been the type to put others first, her team, her boss, her company. But in the process, she's lost sight of what her own goals are. Why am I even doing this? She wonders. What's the bigger picture? She's overwhelmed and exhausted, and attempts to push through the fatigue only make her feel more drained. Her weekends aren't much better. She makes ambitious plans to unwind, but her mind stays tethered to her inbox. Even simple pleasures like going to her favorite yoga class now feels like an item on a never-ending to-do list. The thought of finding balance feels impossible. Today, I'll be speaking with Chelsea Pottenger, a globally recognized keynote speaker, best-selling author of The Mindful High Performer, and founder of EQ Minds. Chelsea partners with organizations like Google and Estee Lauder to reduce stress, improve mental health, and boost productivity. An accredited mindfulness coach and ambassador to mental health charities, Chelsea combines science and personal insights to help leaders like Ariana build resilience and thrive under pressure. I'm excited to hear how Chelsea would guide Ariana to reclaim her purpose and her balance while learning how to lead with renewed energy. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Chelsea, we're going to get into Ariana's story here in a little bit, but I want to learn more about your story. And I've read a little bit about what you experienced, and you were quite vulnerable about it. You share your experience of severe postnatal depression that you had years ago with your daughter, Clara. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about that story, what that was like for you and your journey of recovery after that.
Thank you, Jay. Well, to be honest, if you had asked any of my friends or family, would I be someone who would suffer postnatal depression, they would have said, no way, like there's no chance, right? Because naturally, I'm a really happy person. And this is the thing about postnatal depression and mental illness, though, is that it doesn't discriminate. Pre the whole experience, I was in corporate, fast-paced environment. 12-hour days was kind of our jam. We used to drink a fair bit of alcohol at nighttime, would take our surgeons out for drinks because I used to work in medical devices for Johnson & Johnson. And that was healthcare compliance days. This is going back, 15 years ago. And then in the morning, it would be like triathlon training, lots of coffee, rise and grind, no rest days. That's how we operated back then. Very unsustainable pace, to be honest. And towards the end of my corporate career, I was a general manager. The pace was still really fast. And then 2015, in comes the bundle of joy, Clara Pottinger. That's our gorgeous little girl. And it took us 7 years to fall pregnant with Clara, Jay. So as you can imagine, if there's any parents that are listening right now, you're just so happy, right? Like just so elated when you finally find out that you're having a baby. And then the most ironic thing happens to me. And that is, 9 weeks post-birth, I end up in a psychiatric hospital for mums and bubs, really clinically unwell. I had suicidal ideation. I was suffering severely postnatal depression. And the safest place I could be was actually laying in a hospital bed. And I always feel like this, right? Like when life throws you adversity, like it throws you kind of a lemon on your pathway, you kind of get to a fork in the road. And it's like this sliding doors moment where you've got to make some new choices. And so I'm laying there, and the choices I had to make was, one, do I turn back, pre-mental illness, fast-paced lifestyle, corporate life? Or two, do I learn and I grow from this gift that the universe and God has just kind of like served up to me, right? So at the end of the 5-week stay, my amazing psychiatrist, my doctor, she said to me, Chelsea, you have a weird fascination with your brain. And I think it was because I was just so used to being in surgical theatres with doctors all the time. So I really loved anatomy and kind of understanding the brain. And she said, you are such a lovely person. Like she said, every morning you make smoothies for all the mums on the ward. And, and she's like, and you walk through the shoes of a very unwell patient. So you've seen it, right, through the lens of a very, very unwell patient. I think you'd make a lovely psychologist. She's like, why don't you leave corporate, go back and retrain? And so I did that. So I left the big city. I moved to a smaller country town in Australia with my husband and my daughter, who was then 7 months at the time. And I went back to university and I started studying psychology. And to be honest, Jay, the mission and the fire in my belly was then born. And that was this. I never wanted anyone who I could, touch in terms of speak to or impact to ever end up where I had. I never wanted anyone to end up in hospital with a mental illness. I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I stop people from falling in the river? And so what I decided to do was to start a company, and that was called EQ Minds. And that is now, that is 8 years ago now. And to date, we've trained like 2 million people, and we work with the biggest brands like Google and Mercedes and Allianz and Estee Lauder and Johnson & Johnson now have me back in a different, in a different way. And honestly, mate, it is such joy. Every single day I feel immense gratitude that I get to do this. And so going back to university and retraining, but also like spending time at the Buddhist temples here in Australia and learning how to love myself again and show myself self-care. It was almost like that had to happen for me to get to where I am today. And I know this sounds probably weird, but it's like I look back on that experience with just enormous gratitude, because I'm still a very happy person, but I'm now a very calmer version of myself.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that so openly and so honestly. What I'm sure you have reflected on in that journey is, well, if you were to go upstream as earlier in life, what led to those tendencies, right? Because it's something early on, an upbringing, right?
Yeah,
That
of course.
builds this pattern within us to behave certain ways. So in your reflection, what was it? Was there something in your upbringing you feel like that led to you falling into those kind of patterns of very, very high performance, but at times at the sacrifice of your own well-being?
Oh, it's so true. And that's a great question. And reflecting back on my life, exploring that sort of the underlying reason of why I was just always in this constant doing mode. And I think, for me, like growing up, I was played basketball at a high level. I actually came to America and played at Oklahoma Division I basketball. And so I had this this fear of failure. I always wanted to be a high achiever. Probably a need for validation, the middle child. I'm trying to navigate my own pathway. There was definitely a sense of perfectionism there. And, that probably stems from one of my parents, and I love my parents. I don't want to throw shade at my parents because
Yeah.
I love them so much. But, from that level of like when I played the piano and I'd get an A minus, my father would say, well, where's your A plus? And, I'd make the Division 1 basketball team for America and would leave Australia to come to America when I was 18. And that was scary, right? Like we only just got our first phone then. And he'd be like, well, now you've made that, you need to play in the NBA. So it's just this constant push of striving, And I think when I had Clara, it was this perfectionism of like what that perfect mother would look like.
Mm.
And if there's any parents who are listening, I can tell you right now, like perfectionism is just not something to ever strive for. And you don't get a guidebook and it's not a perfect to-do list that you can tick off. Like babies just don't they're on their own agenda, right? So it's almost like everything gets thrown on its head. It's probably an identity loss of who you are, but it's this also rebirth of like this beautiful human you are now becoming, and this really sense of selflessness where your heartbeat now beats on the outside of you. You love something more than yourself. And it's so becoming a parent has been incredibly, it's been a sophistication of the evolving of me as a person for sure. But I understand why I'm susceptible now to things like perinatal and postnatal anxiety and depression, because I definitely ticked some of these clear behavioral boxes of like type A, high functioning, perfectionism, striving, to-do list person, got to get it done, and you just got to let that go.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up basketball, and my daughter right now is in basketball practice as we speak. She's in basketball practice. And what you said triggered something for me, which is that tendency that I know I have as well of wanting to please, wanting to succeed. And similar to you, I love my parents. I love my mother. I love my father. My father passed away, but my mother, definitely part of that relationship was with her as well. And so then it comes to, how do we not pass that down to our children? Does that come up for you? It comes up for me. I could tell you right now, I have to catch myself a lot, which is I want what's best for her. I want her to succeed. I want her to be the best version of her every single day. I have to be careful, though, of the way I deliver that message, because I could be unintentionally programming some of those patterns into her that I had to overcome in my childhood.
So true. Yeah, it's so true. Some really lovely things that I've learned along the journey, even just being at university, and going, okay, how do I make sure that I don't turn our daughter into a perfectionist? Is things like, instead of, I don't know if your parents, Jay, used to say this to you, like practice makes perfect, those kinds of things. And, my parents used to say that to me all the time. And now what we say in psychology anyway to instill these growth mindsets is practice makes progress. It's with the hard work, right? That's how you get ahead. And even little reframes like, I remember when Clara was 4 and she's always come up to me going, Mummy, I can't skip, and Mummy, I can't climb that big tree, and Mummy, I can't ride my bicycle in town, because we live in a very hilly town. And I used to always say to her, yet, my sweetheart, yet, Dr. Carol Dweck's work, which is amazing around growth mindset. However, if you do these few things, you'll get there. And what's so beautiful, Jay, is like you just constantly saying these things to your children, going, is this even sinking in, right? And then a few years later, they're like, hey, Mummy, I can't surf yet. However, if you pay for my lessons, and I'm like, yeah. They start repeating it back to you. And I love that, because it gives them this growth mindset of like, this is great. Like if you can stay in this growth mindset, like the reason that you get into, the reason why you do well in basketball, or the reason is because you're doing your best. You're doing your best that you can. And that's great. If you're putting in your effort and that's where you're landing, I'm so proud of you. And always unlocking that potential that there is scope or room for more, but it's really just moving away from those, the reason why you're doing that is because you're you're beautiful, or you're smart, or those identities I just move away from, so I'm not fixing up her mindset around those kinds of things.
And I think this applies to adults as well. That work by Carol Dweck and the book, I think it's called Nurture Shock, where she highlights that study, or that study is highlighted, where
Mhm.
there's a group of children who are rewarded for great effort, and then another
Yes.
group of children that are rewarded for their intelligence and,
Yes.
yeah, you're smart. And they then assess their progress over a number of different puzzles. And the ones who were celebrated for their effort performed better on the more advanced puzzles. And then when
Mhm.
asked to do the simpler ones, they did them faster and more efficiently and more effectively.
Mhm.
So it proved that when we celebrate our progress, as you so wonderfully described there, we are happier and more productive.
Mm.
Both things are true, right? We are actually better, we perform better. So I do
Mhm.
think this applies for adults as well. Now, with the aspect of caring for yourself, there's something I read that you wrote on your website I had to ask you about. I wrote it down. I'm going to read it. It is: self care isn't selfish, it's self preservation.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that for us?
Thank you. And absolutely. So this is such a huge thing of like high performers and just people in general, right? I always think about this all the time. It's almost like a rebrand of self care, because people would think that self care is selfish. Oh my gosh, I can't take time out for myself. I've got children, I've got the dog, I've got my job, I've got, you know. And I'm like, wow, this needs a full rebrand in terms of, if we do not take care of ourselves every day, like we don't start investing into our wellness every single day, what happens is we're forced to take care of our illness. And I remember Dr. Daniel Amen had this beautiful quote about this. And I'm like, that is so true. If we don't take care of our wellness every day, we become forced to take care of our illness. And it might not be tomorrow, it might not be in a week, but I can guarantee you in a few months, if you have not invested into your well-being every single day, you're going to get the flu, right? So, or you're going to get, maybe you get a sty in your eye, or maybe you're going to get an irritable gut, or maybe you're going to start getting migraines. And it's just like, this is just such a key thing in terms of how do we unlock the intrinsic motivation for people to make sure that every single day that they are looking after themselves, so they don't see it as like this selfish behavior. And something that my psychiatrist said to me when I left the hospital, which every day I think about, and she's just incredible human. And she said to me, Chelsea, moving forward, if you do not take care of yourself every day, you don't meditate, you don't exercise, you don't eat clean, you don't take your medication in the morning, and you burn out, right? Like, who does that impact? And I'm like, well, it impacts me, right? Because I get sick and then I need to take a month off to recover. And she's like, that's true. And that kind of sucks for you. However, who else does that impact? And I said, well, it directly impacts my daughter, and it directly impacts my husband. And she's like, well, is that fair for them? Like, does your daughter deserve a stressed out, burnt out, anxious mum? Like, does that fair for her? You walk in that front door and you're burnt out. And I'm like, no. And she said, from now on, every single day, if you cannot motivate yourself for you, then I'm going to ask you to think about someone that you love more than yourself, and you do it for them. And that, Jay, was the biggest intrinsic motivation for me, because I think about her all the time. And sometimes, I can still get caught up. Like, I live and breathe this space every single day. And sometimes if I miss key things, which we'll talk about later, in terms of how I make sure that I sustain my longevity and not burn out, if I miss those things, I can still spiral. But the beautiful thing is I catch myself earlier these days in the space.
Yeah.
So, so it doesn't sustain into burnout. But wow, that's such an intrinsic motivation for me. Like, if you get sick, does it impact your mum? Because now your mum's got to come over, right? And take care of you for a month. It impacts your work. If you've got a company, man, you got to shut that down, right? Like, if you're running a business and you get really sick, like, you got to close that thing down for a few weeks. Right? So it's just like, it's finding what the hook is for you to unlock that motivation.
Yeah. I was reminded of a story of my daughter, Amelia, when years ago. It was when I was first starting my business, and she would ask me like, "Daddy, what do you do?" And I would explain what I did. But the simplest way would be, my job is to make people happy.
That's beautiful.
To make it like very easy for her to understand. And I'll never forget, she came to me one day where I was spiraling. And she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, if your job is to make other people happy, then why does it make you unhappy to make other people happy?"
Oh, oh, they're so wise.
Yeah. And I
How
said,
old,
"What's that?"
how old was Amelia at the time?
Oh, she was probably, this was early. So I'm guessing she was 6 or 7 at the
Yeah,
time when she said that to me. And it really hit me, Chelsea. And it is one of the intrinsic motivators for me. And so, anyone listening here, please take that seriously, what Chelsea said. Consider
yeah,
the people in your life who are affected. Consider how it impacts them. And that, don't consider this a selfish act to make sure that you are caring for yourself. If anything, it's a selfish act to not care about yourself.
it's so true. It's the
Right?
opposite.
It's the complete opposite. And I want to, of course, ask for you to tell us a little bit about some of the tools that you recommend. But you mentioned a few things there that are things that we do daily to take care of ourselves that are not necessarily, a stress management tool. It's just the things that we do day in and day out to care for ourselves. So, like, for example, while of course an Ariana story, we can give her some tools, and we will in our conversation. But what are some things that you recommend for, let's say, Ariana or anybody else to take inventory of, to be able to find ways where they can make tweaks and adjustments to their day to day to be energized and be taken care of?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay. And I'll just give you a buffet of ideas here and invitations for people because I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. I just think if you can do one or two things for yourself every day, then that's amazing. And so, even like for me, it's like, I think about my day and what are my non negotiables, really. So, even just waking up and giving myself those first few minutes upon waking without checking my phone, right? And just waking up, doing some gratitude, right? And before I even look at my phone, I just don't look at my phone for the first 10 minutes. I just give myself peace, right? I wake up, usually my daughter is sleeping in my bed at the moment. So we wake up, I love you, sweetie. What are you grateful for? My husband's been kicked out of my bedroom. It's now just me and my daughter. But it's beautiful, right? Because then we do this together. And then the exercise for me is a non-negotiable. And it's not like I've got to pound the pavement or marathon run, or it's just half an hour. And I usually take her on the journey. My husband and I will take her on the journey with us. So we'll ride our bikes uptown for a coffee. We'll go for a surf. We might go for a walk, depending on our schedule, right? Like if we've got to do a lot of speaking that day, maybe it's like we've got a epic weights set up in our garage. So maybe it's just like a workout down there. And it's just, if I can clock 30 minutes in the morning, my brain is firing on all cylinders, and it's just really good for mental health. Like for me, I just really have to do that. And then it's just clean eating that day, right? So I just like, don't get me wrong, Jay, I will totally treat myself, usually on the weekends, right? Like for sure, if Claire's like, let's get an ice cream, mum, like, let's do it, sweetheart. For sure, right? Because you want to live and you don't want to be too strict on yourself. But during the day, it is usually cleaner. It's a lot cleaner eating. I will have coffee. I really enjoy coffee, but I won't go over. And then, like, I will definitely schedule in somewhere in my day a 10-minute meditation. That is 100% non-negotiable in my life. When my schedule's really busy, like when I'm doing 10 keynotes a week, we manage a company, I've got daughter, your mom, looking after aging parents, like everyone listening, I'm sure, we've all got our own bag of busy, right? And when my schedule is like that, I 100% I'm doing 10 minutes of usually like non-sleep deep rest protocol, like a yoga nidra of some type, which you can just find on Insight Timer, which is a free app, or on Calm or Headspace. But I book that in because I know the evidence behind it and it restores my brain. So that's a non-negotiable. And then, in the nighttime, so just to bookend the day, so first few minutes of the morning, that's kind of my glory minutes, right? I'm doing some great bookending the day. Half an hour before I go to sleep, screens are off, right? And I'm doing a really gentle unwinding routine. Like things like I'll talk to my partner for sure. He'll be part of that. Hot shower, brush teeth, like I stretch. I read a book, like one that's not on a screen, one that looks like one and smells like a book. Then I usually meditate. Or before I do meditation at the moment, something that Karen and I have been doing again back in at our nighttime routine, which I just find has been incredible, is gratitude journaling. And we just switch over our journaling once we write it down. She's now 9. And so I find doing that before I go to sleep, it's really beautiful, right? Because you get to live that gratefulness twice. Like you live that during the day, like I'm grateful that this morning I went for a surf. And then I live it again at nighttime as I'm going to sleep because it reflects back that really happy memory. And then I meditate and then I'm kind of down and out for the count. And so it's just having a bookend on both that sides of the day. That is superific for my brain. And I'm a happy human doing that, right? So they're kind of things that not drinking alcohol, right? Monday to Friday, I just don't drink alcohol. If I am on the road and I start to go out for client dinners and I start having a glass of wine and I do that regularly, that is not good for me, for my mental health. I know that about myself. And I can slip, right? When I'm tired and feeling burnt out, I'm like, oh, we're at a really nice restaurant. Yeah, I'll get a glass of Shiraz. But I'm like, no, that is actually, you need those disciplines. No, that is not good for this vessel right now. So they're just a few. How about you? Like, do you have things in your calendar that you kind of just like, these are just non-negotiables for me?
Yeah, I think it's great you use that term. I've been using that term for years. All of my clients know it. They go through my program and they know what their non-negotiables are. I have my non-negotiables too. And so many things are similar. I'm similar. I normally don't meditate for more than 10 minutes. On certain days I may, but I tend to be too busy where 10 minutes is really the time limit for me. And so that's one of my non-negotiables. One of the things that I do daily is before going to bed, my fiance and we have it's a journal diary of sorts where we're prompted with a question every single day. And the questions are typically around gratitude, learning about one another. It's fun questions. And we do this before bed every night. I have a book that I will read. And sometimes, Chelsea, I don't read for 30 minutes. It's like 3 minutes. It's just like if I'm really tired, right? 3 minutes of reading. That's it. And so also, I tend to be quite regimented. I have the same lunch at the same time every single day, and it's always something very healthy because I find it gives me energy. There's
Absolutely.
benefits to it. It's a blend of vegetables and berries and things like that give me energy, and it's all through the experiments that I've done over the years to find out what's best for my body. Just like you were explaining coffee. I only have 1 cup of coffee in the morning and then I won't have it. I have to finish it by noon. It's like a rule. I have to
Yeah.
finish it by 12 p.m. Otherwise, I'll spill it out if
Sleep.
I can't. Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
sleep. It'll mess with my sleep. So
Same.
so it's things like this, and I'm so glad that we're talking about it because so often, Chelsea, that people are assuming, oh, I have to go with this new practice, like there's
Mhm.
something this out extraordinary in a new practice. When in reality, no, it's just doing the things that you need to do daily, like eat healthy, drink enough water, have sufficient sleep, make
Yes.
sure you do something physical, some physical movement, right? These
Yeah.
basic things prove to yield great results, not these overly complicated tools and techniques that oftentimes people are seeking.
It's so true. Or a quick win, like a quick fix. Like, what's the pill I can? It's just it's simplifying your life back, right? Just everything just scales all the way back, and you simplify. And I honestly think it takes about 3 days to turn human beings around in terms of their energy. So if people are feeling really burnt out, I'm like, hey, if you just nail the basics for 3 days, depending on where you are on this burnout scale, but if you can nail the basics for 3 days, you will see a significant shift start to happening with your energy management. And you start going, well, I actually feel really good. I'm going to keep doing, I'm going to just keep doing this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
And, some of my other non-negotiable, once a week, I have a massage. It is like a non-negotiable in my life, like massage every week for an hour. I love it. I'm like, I am so grateful. Every time I turn up to that massage to my amazing therapist, I'm like, I just love this piece of self-care for you right now.
Yeah. And there's so many ways to find substitutes to things that are unhealthy. Like you were describing alcohol. I actually just had a conversation with someone. It was no, today. It was this morning where she was preparing for a very important interview. So one of the things we talked about was don't drink alcohol yesterday for the interview you have today because it will have an impact on your energy. So one example of this is Monday through Friday, I don't want to drink any alcohol. I'll have a non-alcoholic beer
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
of my day. And
Yes.
it's wonderful. I look forward to it. It
Yeah.
has no alcohol in it at all. And it's something that I can enjoy while I'm with my fiance, with my daughter, and it's not going to
Yeah.
impact me the next day. So for people who you get caught and attached to one thing, there are ways in which you can substitute for things that are unhealthy behaviors that won't be anything like too expensive or too energy draining for you. And so when when we were talking, or what's in Ariana's story and what you were
Mm,
just describing, you said, creating that schedule and that discipline. One of the things
mhm.
that are in her story is she sometimes will schedule something for herself over the weekend, and then she doesn't get to it. She just she pushes it off. How do you recommend people really commit to those things? You want to put breaks on your calendar. You want to go out for a walk, physical exercise, but then I have to get more done. I have to do work comes up, and that pulls you into doing more work and burning out. How do you recommend people maintain that discipline?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I think there's so much to unpack with this Ariana's story in terms of like, because we can all get to that stage, right? Where we're just like, I just got to do a little bit more. And once I do that, then I'll give myself a break. And then once I get that done, I'll give myself. And what happens is we just keep going like this. So all of a sudden we find ourselves drinking in nighttime. We then wake up a little bit the next day, a little bit. So we caffeinate, right, for stimulation. And then
Mm.
because we haven't slept well, we kind of not lean on the right kinds of foods. And then at the end of the day, we're like, I'm exhausted. I'm going to put on Netflix. I'm now going to drink more alcohol. That's how I'm unwinding it, And it's just this spiral, right? So I think a big thing is like, what is the root cause of driving this behavior? Why are we in this constant doing mode? Is it fear of failure? Is it a need for validation? Is it perfectionism? Is it kind of these unclear priorities? And then I think a really big thing is for people to pause and go, well, what are my true core values? What truly matters to me? Yeah. And then how is my current lifestyle aligned or misaligned with these values that I'm currently living? For example, my values, right? Health, number one, my mental health and physical health. Because if that is not doing okay, then my number two value, which is actually more important than my health, but I know my vessel needs to be good for the second thing, which is my family. My family and my friends are like number two, right? And then number three is travel and adventure. I love it. And then number four is charity work. I want to have enough to be able to give to others and make the collective rise around me. So if my value is health and well-being and, family and friends, and people listening are like, yeah, I value that stuff, because people will say to me, I love my family and they mean more to me than anything in this world. But all of a sudden they're doing 70 hours a week and they're not seeing their family. Or when they are, they're like, can you just give me a moment? I've got to get this, this work thing. There's a complete cognitive dissonance there. And so I think that whole thing, like unpacking what's driving this, and then what are your true values, and a big thing when people are thinking about like redefining success and setting boundaries moving forward is how do you want to feel in this life? Like 2025 is here. How do you want to feel this year? Like, not what do you want to have? Let's just redefine what success looks like, because a lot of people go outwards for external validation, and our success looks like this kind of car or this house. And what happens on the hedonic wheel is you get the car and you get the house and your dopamine goes up for a week and then you kind of revert back to that. So that feeling of how you want to feel moving forward kind of should be the theme for your year, and then your goals and stuff align to that. So if you want to feel more balanced, say you're listening like, Chelsea, I am burnt out. I need to be more balanced next year. I want to have joy, right? I want to feel happy in this life. If that is your theme and that's how you want to feel, well, then let's really redefine success for you and set some really, really clear boundaries. Because sometimes in corporate, right, with Ariana's story, we're not saving lives, right? We're not. We're not. People are not depending on us to save their life,
Mhm.
right? So we just put on this incredible pressure on ourselves to just for this ridiculous output. So we need to almost like have these new clear boundaries of, right, okay, so what does success look like to me? For me personally, success looks like having impact, right? Having really great impact on human beings and really enjoying this experience. And I'm turning up as a happy version of myself, and my family and friends are getting a really great version of me. So, okay, that's what success looks like to me. So then what do I need to put into my calendar to set these really clear boundaries? So, for example, for Ariana, if having not just the weekends, but having things like boundaries in her day to day where she can prioritize, um, and using, like for me, I use a lot of time management techniques, right? So then I'm like super efficient in the chair at work. I work in sort of like Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes in the saddle, then I give myself a 5-minute break. I'm using an AI tool called Reclaim AI, right? So then it like prioritizes my tasks in my calendar. But I'll also make sure that every day I schedule in, as we're talking about, prioritization is a task of 10 minutes of meditation. That's like locked in there as a high priority.
When do you do that? Do you do that the day prior? What's your process of creating your plan? Is it for the whole week? What is your system of this?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. So our calendar is usually locked out in the week
Mhm.
because of my speaker schedule. So then I can like put in tasks around those kinds of things. Now, the night before, I'll always review the next day going, well, what do oh, great, I've got a podcast with Jay in the morning, and then I've got a keynote there, and then I've got a pitch there, but then I have time here for meditation. I've got time there. That's a coffee meeting with a CEO. I'm going to go for a walk and talk rather than a sit down. I'm going to say, hey, tomorrow we're catching up. You want to bring your joggers to the office? Let's get outside, get some vitamin D, and we'll walk and talk rather than sitting down, right, in the cafe and having a coffee. And then that way I'm like, great, I'm hitting a few like things there, right? Side by side conversation. So he's going to open up more to me. I know that. 2, we're outside, vitamin D hit, we're exercising. So I'm getting a cup full as well, which is great. How about you? Do you do day by day, or what do you look like in terms of your scheduling?
It's a combination where I do spend time on a Sunday, and I like doing it. It's something I enjoy, where I look ahead at the week, but I don't over schedule each day. Like I won't put in every block for every minute of every day. Instead, I'll say, what are my main focus areas for the week? What are the things that really matter? And be sure that I have some time set to do those things. Then I go through the daily process of looking at the next day. And there I get a bit more specific and specifically blocking out during this time I'm going to be focusing on preparing for this podcast, right? And doing my research on Chelsea and whatever it is that I have on the high priority list for that next day. And I do include things where there's always a block for lunch. There's always a block for personal time to go out for a walk. The weather's a little too cold now. So now what I do is I walk around my house while I'm listening to something, right? I have something in my earbuds that is maybe an audiobook or a specific podcast. So I find my ways to bring in some positive consumption through some other activities, similar to the way you just described it. I think that's a really cool thing that I hope people take away. Wait, like if you tell yourself you don't have the time, Chelsea just said, "Well, I am going to be meeting with the CEO, but I'm going to somehow also include physical exercise during that meeting with the CEO, right? I'm going to find a way to make it where we're more connected, and I'm going to be out in nature." So there's always a way, but to your point, you plan it. It's not something that you hope is going to happen, right? I see you shaking your head. It's
Yeah,
very, very intentional how you set up your day.
100%. And I think when you have the energy, you have the creativity and the innovation to think about these kinds of things. I think when you are burning out, and we see it, right? The 3 clinical dimensions that people will always look out for, because we're like, am I stressed or am I burnt out? And so when you are burning, it's like that reduced sense of accomplishment, right? You just can't produce in the same kind of way. Even though you might be doing longer hours, your output and your creativity is completely stifled, and you would actually feel that. And then it's like that cynicism Like it's like you get this really irritability towards work and people in your life and the world in general. And I really think that you don't want to end up there, because what happens is you just don't have the joy. Like you just literally, you're not enjoying your work. You also now don't have hobbies outside of work. You can't socially connect on the weekends. You're just too tired. And as a human being, we're so much more dimensional rather than just like work and work and work, because this journey is short, right? It is a short journey that we're here on this beautiful planet for. So we want you to be really successful and high performing, but we also want you to protect this while you're doing it, right? Like your well-being and your vessel. And something that my mentors taught me, and I think this is just gold, and something that I've been doing for the last 3 years now, is that every 6 weeks, I take a break. Every 6 weeks, I schedule in 3 days, right? And I unplug, I go ghost on the world. And so on those 3 days, and then every sort of 11 to 12, we'll take a week off because it coincides with our daughter's school terms. But something magical happens there. So 2 weeks before you have a break coming up, what happens in psychology, you get this natural serotonin release, right? It's called anticipatory joy, and you feel that. You speak to anyone going on a holiday, right, Jay? Like, how do they sound?
Oh,
they sound so upbeat, right? They're just like
excited.
Yeah, right. The coffee tastes better. The sky looks bluer, and it's because they're going on a holiday. Yeah, and then they come back, and then they can pace set, right? They can go pretty hard as long as they've got other things going on during their daily, with their schedule and their breaks. And 6 weeks later, you've got another break coming up. And so what happens here, you have these short bursts. And so what we see sometimes in global companies is that people will bust so hard throughout the year, and they take 4 weeks off over Christmas, and they get sick on day 2 with the flu. Because it's almost like the body's stopped, and you're like, oh, you've now paused. Let me serve you up with some kind of sickness so you don't do that to me again next year. And
Yeah.
because people are like, how can you do 10 keynotes a week? And I'm like, I've got a very clear boundaries, only 2 a day. That is my maximum. But the reason that I can do that and have great energy for my audience and for my clients and for myself is because every 6 weeks I take a scheduled break and I literally go ghost. Now, what I mean by that, where I unplug from the world, is that my email, everything's switched off. I go on a trip. It doesn't need to be expensive. It could be camping and surfing, but there's no Wi-Fi. And I'm just really mindful with the people that I'm there with. And the world can't find me. And it's the most liberating 3 days, because I'm just nailing the basics on those 3 days, right? Like I'm sleeping well, I'm eating clean, I'm exercising daily, I'm reading, personal growth books, I'm listening to great music, I'm eating great food. I might be with, on particular breaks, I might be with a bunch of girlfriends, right? And I'm just enjoying the time in nature together. Other times it's with my family, might be skiing for a week somewhere, but it's like mindful act. And then when we're at dinners, we're with each other. We're not on our phone, it is so, I cannot tell you how liberating those breaks are. And if you even do it for a week, obviously people who are listening, due diligence with your current work schedule. If you can just do it for a weekend, I cannot tell you how restored you feel on that Monday when you get back.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something before that those who listen to this podcast know that I always advocate for, which is to focus on what you are experiencing, what you want to be experiencing, not what are the outcomes that you wish to achieve, what are the, titles that you want to get to. Life is a series of experiences and how you feel. And it's just wonderful to hear that from you, Chelsea. And also everyone listening too. Like Chelsea's a very, very high demand speaker, runs a company, has a lot going on. You're not just, sitting in a cave meditating somewhere, right? You're doing you're very, very busy, but you are proof that when someone really sets their mind to high achievement and balance, it's possible with the ability to get great results, make a big impact, and taking care of themselves and their families at the same time. And so I want to ask you, because I always like to do this at the end, it's like a little fun exercise I'm going to put you through.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine this scenario where you get to meet Ariana. So let's say you were giving a keynote, you were doing a workshop for her company. She's listening. She gets inspired by your talk. After you get off the stage, you're chatting with some of the people that were in the audience. She comes up to you, Chelsea. She's telling you what she's going through. She tells you her story. Now, you don't have a lot of time here because, of course, you have to get to your next keynote, right? You have to keep your boundaries in place, but you have a moment there to talk to her. And I know that because I know you, but you probably wouldn't just bombard her with advice. You would probably start with a question to evoke some shift in thinking. What would be the first thing you would ask her?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. The first thing I would do, to be honest, I'd just acknowledge, right, how she's feeling. I think that's a really important thing. Like, her feelings are valid. So many high achievers like you have similar challenges. And I think that's a really important thing, just to create this safe space for Ariana where I'm not like, here's what you should do. I'm just like, so she's opening up about her experience without, any judgment. And then I'd say to her, how's this pace making you feel? And is this something that you want to change? Because sometimes people are not ready for it, right, Jay? Mm-hmm. Like, you can lead the people, is that whole thing, horse to water, can't make it drink. Like, are you ready for the change, Ariana? Are you happy with this current lifestyle? If you're ready to make some change, the very, very first thing that I would do was this weekend, I'd give yourself a full reset. Take the weekend off, right? Where you're just literally going to double down on these kinds of things we've been speaking about. And I think that's a really important thing, because people need to be ready for it. Otherwise, they're not going to take it on. And it's trying to, for her, unlock what truly matters to her. Is your current lifestyle, Ariana, is it aligned or misaligned to your values? And just pause and listen, right? And if it's not, hey, let's start putting some simple things in as of today that you can do, right? The weekend's coming up. Let's think about this kind of stuff. So I think that's a really important thing, is that, and after keynotes, I will 100% stay around for half an hour. I will always do that, because there's so many people that come and talk to me. I would never just run off going, good luck with that.
I get that. Well, you have that scheduled in, as you were describing, right? You have that time scheduled in because you recognize the value in doing that. And I know that you're going to be coming to the States in May. You're going to be doing some keynotes in Florida, and anyone looking to bring in a great speaker, someone who has great experience, I highly recommend reaching out to Chelsea, her team. It is eqminds.com. And from there, anyone can reach out, connect. And of course, I know on there, you also have all the ways in which people can follow you on social as well. So Chelsea, I want to thank you so much. This was incredible. This was a lot of fun. And I would, of course, love to have you back on in the future at another time, if we could fit it into the schedule. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jane, for all the work you do. Keep being that shining light, mate. You're doing so great. Thank you.
If you ever thought it was impossible or had doubts that someone can be a high-achieving top performer and maintain a healthy balance and take care of themselves, I hope that you see that Chelsea is the proof. She is an absolute rock star, and she's really always prioritizing her own well-being, her health, and the people around her as well. And I'm going to synthesize our conversation down to the 3 insights and 3 actionable takeaways. Our first insight: practice makes progress. Not practice makes perfect. We can't attach to perfection. And if you're not achieving at the level that you want to be, then add that word yet at the end of the sentence. I'm not achieving this yet. Maintain that growth mindset. Second insight: self-care is not selfish, it's self-preservation. I like how she referred to this as a rebranding of self-care. And she also alluded to how if you don't take care of your wellness today, you're forced to take care of your illness in the future. And how she also framed this as intrinsic motivation, which is, if you don't take care of yourself, how is it affecting the people around you, the people who matter most to you? How are they impacted when you're not caring for yourself? Third insight: Get clear on your values. She outlined them very simply. First was health, second was family, third was travel and adventure, and fourth was charity. And she creates her calendar and she spends her time committing to those 4 areas of her life, and they come before anything else. Have you done that for yourself? Are you very clear on what your values are? Actionable takeaways. First one, simplify your life. Nail the basics. She provided a buffet of ideas to, as she said, protect your vessel. And that included exercise, meditation, gratitude practice, having some boundaries on cell phones, which we've talked about in recent episodes. And if you just commit to them day in and day out, you're going to be optimizing your energy, your focus, and your productivity. Second actionable takeaway, ask yourself, how do I want to feel? What does success look like to me? You need to be able to design your day according to how you want to be feeling, what you want to be experiencing, because that's what life consists of, right? All those achievements and results that you're after, you don't experience those. You experience how you feel. So make it be about how you want to be feeling every day. Third actionable takeaway, plan your day according to your values. So again, earlier I said health, family, travel and adventure, and charity. She said those were the 4 things. So then she's creating her day according to those areas. She's making sure she has time for all 4 of those throughout the week. You do the same. Look at the day ahead or the week ahead, whatever works for you, and make sure that you're carving out time for the things that matter most. Join us on Friday in our shorter episode. I'm going to be diving deeper into the basics. I think it's something that has, at least over the last 10 years, really showcased the importance of through studies and through research. I'm going to go through the research on this, specifically around sleep. I think people underestimate how important sleep is. So I'm going to be diving into those studies with you and then helping you to create a plan of how you can really commit to the basics day in and day out. Create an intentional plan and a mechanism through which you can fulfill your commitments. That'll be on Friday's episode. Remember, that's not on YouTube. That's just on the podcast platform of your choosing. So until then, thank you so much for listening.